The air in the boardroom of Shaw, Weinberg and Associates was thick enough to be bottled and sold as a luxury poison. Seated at the head of a polished mahogany table, Preston Davenport, tech mogul and heir apparent, adjusted his $5,000 tie, a smug grin plastered on his face. Beside him, a woman named Kenzie Monroe, dripping in diamonds that were certainly not family heirlooms, ran a possessive hand up his arm. Across from them sat Preston's sister Catherine, her expression a mask of strained politeness. This wasn't just a meeting, it was the final act of a lifelong power play, the reading of their father's will. But no one in that room, especially not Preston, could possibly anticipate the meticulously planned grenade their deceased patriarch had left behind. A grenade the calm, unassuming lawyer was just about to roll across the table. The 36th floor of the Omni Tower offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling kingdom of glass and steel that Walter Davenport had helped build, and which his son Preston now looked upon as his birthright. Preston felt the familiar thrum of power in his veins. At 42, he was the CEO of Davenport Innovations, a company he'd steered into the stratosphere of aggressive tech acquisitions. He was handsome, ruthless, and utterly convinced of his own manifest destiny. His father, Walter, had been old school, a man of handshakes, integrity, and quiet strength. He'd passed away 2 weeks ago, and while Preston had performed the role of grieving son with convincing solemnity, his mind was already allocating the vast resources of the Davenport estate. "Are we sure Garrett is coming? Some of us have companies to run," Preston announced to the room, his voice echoing slightly in the opulent space. He squeezed Kenzie's hand, a public display for his sister's benefit. Kenzie Monroe was 26, a former Instagram model who now curated a lifestyle brand. She was stunning in a severe modern way, her white blazer sharp enough to cut glass. She radiated an aura of victory, as if she had already won a competition no one else knew they were in. She leaned in and whispered in Preston's ear, "Don't worry, darling. Once this is all over, we'll take that trip to Monaco. Just you and me." Her eyes flickered towards Catherine, a tiny triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Catherine Davenport Price, Preston's older sister by 3 years, sat perfectly still. She was the opposite of Kenzie's sharp edges. She was soft-spoken, dressed in a conservative navy blue dress, her only jewelry the simple wedding band on her finger and her mother's pearl earrings. Her husband, Robert, a placid university professor, sat beside her, looking deeply uncomfortable. Catherine had always known who her brother was. She'd seen his casual cruelty, his transactional relationships, and his bottomless ego. Seeing him with Kenzie, this vapid caricature of a partner, at their father's will reading was a profound insult. She knew her father, a man who valued substance over style, would have despised everything Kenzie represented. The heavy oak door opened and Mr. Garrett Shaw entered. He was in his late 60s, with a neat silver hair and the kind of calm, discerning eyes that missed nothing. He had been Walter Davenport's personal lawyer and confidant for over 40 years. He carried a single, thick, leather-bound portfolio. "Preston, Catherine, my apologies for the delay," he said, his voice a smooth baritone that commanded immediate respect. He nodded politely towards Robert and then let his gaze rest on Kenzie for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. There was no judgment in his eyes, merely observation. "Garrett, good to see you," Preston said, standing to shake his hand with practiced charm. "This is Kenzie Monroe, my fiancée." The word fiancé hung in the air. Catherine's back stiffened. Since when? Preston had been divorced for 5 years, a messy affair that their father had loathed, and in that time, he'd paraded a rotating cast of women like Kenzie through his life. Announcing an engagement now, here was a calculated move, a power play. Mr. Shaw's expression didn't flicker. "Ms. Monroe," he acknowledged simply, before taking his seat at the head of the table. He opened the portfolio, the crisp sound of paper turning the only noise in the room. "Let's begin," Mr. Shaw stated. "As you know, I am the executor of your father's last will and testament. Walter was very specific in his instructions, and it is my duty to see them carried out to the letter." He looked over the rim of his spectacles, first at Catherine, then at Preston. "And I do mean to the letter." Preston leaned back, draping his arm over Kenzie's chair. Of course, Garrett. Dad was nothing if not thorough. Let's get on with it. He was already picturing the new wing on his Hamptons estate, the vintage Ferrari he'd had his eye on. The future was bright, shiny, and expensive. He had no idea he was standing on a precipice, and the man he saw only as a dusty old lawyer was about to give him a firm, decisive push. Mr. Shaw cleared his throat and began to read. The initial sections of the will were straightforward, almost mundane, a deliberate calm before the storm Walter had so carefully orchestrated. I, Walter Jonathan Davenport, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils. He detailed a series of bequests, a generous donation to the city's Historical Preservation Society, a scholarship fund for underprivileged engineering students at his alma mater, and substantial bonuses for his longtime household staff. Maria, the housekeeper who had been with the family for 30 years, was to receive a pension that would ensure she lived in comfort for the rest of her life. Mr. Henderson, the gardener who had taught a young Catherine how to tend roses, was given lifetime tenancy of his cottage on the estate grounds. Catherine smiled softly. These were the marks of the father she knew and loved, a man who recognized loyalty and quietly rewarded it. Preston, however, was visibly bored. He tapped an expensive pen on the table, a rhythmic, impatient sound that grated on Catherine's nerves. Kenzie was scrolling through her phone under the table, likely checking the engagement on her latest post. Now, Mr. Shaw said, his tone shifting slightly, we come to the disposition of the primary assets of the Davenport estate, including all properties, liquid assets, and controlling shares in Davenport Innovations. Preston sat up straight. The tapping ceased. This was the main event. Kenzie put her phone away, her attention now fully on the lawyer. Mr. Shaw continued. Walter took great care in drafting this section. He wanted to preface it with a personal note, which he instructed me to read verbatim. He paused, looking directly at Preston and Catherine. He writes, my children, my greatest hope was to leave behind more than just wealth. I hope to leave a legacy of integrity, a name synonymous with honor. Money can build a house, but only character can build a home. It is a lesson I fear I did not always successfully impart. Wealth without a moral compass is not a blessing, but a curse, a weight that will inevitably drag you and everyone you touch into the abyss. It is with this principle in mind that I have structured my final bequests. I do this not to punish, but to protect the family name and the company I dedicated my life to building. An uneasy silence fell over the room. The words were a clear indictment, and though they were addressed to both his children, the barb was clearly aimed at Preston. Preston's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. He felt Kenzie's hand on his thigh, a small, reassuring squeeze that did little to quell the irritation bubbling inside him. His father was still lecturing him from beyond the grave. Charming, Preston muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Catherine to hear. She shot him a warning glare. Mr. Shaw, pretending not to have heard, turned the page. We will first address the matter of the Davenport family home in Greenwich and the summer property in Nantucket, he announced. These properties, along with their contents, are to be left to my daughter, Catherine Davenport Price, and her husband, Robert Price, in their entirety. Catherine gasped. Robert looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise. The Greenwich estate was where they had grown up. It held every memory of her mother, of Christmases and birthdays, of her father teaching her to ride a bike on the long, winding driveway. She had assumed it would be split, or, more likely, that Preston would demand it be sold. What? Preston interjected, his voice sharp. The entire estate? That property alone is worth $50 million. That's hardly an even split, Garrett. Patience, Preston, Mr. Shaw said calmly. Your father was methodical. As for the remainder of the estate, valued at approximately $900 million, including the controlling interest in Davenport Innovations, Walter has stipulated the following. The air crackled with anticipation. This was the real prize. The company, the dynasty. Mr. Shaw looked up from the document, his eyes locking onto Preston's. The remainder of the estate is to be divided equally between my two children, Preston Davenport and Catherine Davenport Price. Preston's relief was palpable. 50-50. He could live with that. He would buy Catherine out of her shares of the company within a year. She had no interest in running it anyway. He flashed a triumphant smile at Kenzie. They were set. 900 million split two ways. 450 million. He was already spending it in his head. However, Mr. Shaw added, and the single word sliced through Preston's euphoria like a razor, there is a condition, a binding, non-negotiable stipulation that applies to any beneficiary of the primary inheritance. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. A condition your father referred to as the legacy clause. Preston's smile faltered, replaced by a look of wary suspicion. A condition? What kind of condition? He asked, his tone laced with impatience. He hated complications, and his father had been a master of them. Mr. Shaw adjusted his glasses and read directly from the will, his voice steady and clear. The legacy clause. It is my firm and unwavering decree that any beneficiary of the primary estate, as outlined above, must be in a stable, legally recognized marital union at the time of this will's execution. This union must be one founded on the principles of fidelity, honor, and mutual respect, the bedrock upon which I built my own life and this family. It is my belief that a person incapable of maintaining such a bond is incapable of responsibly stewarding the legacy I leave behind. The room fell silent. Catherine looked at her husband, Robert, a gentle smile touching her lips. They had been happily married for 12 years. For her, the condition was a mere formality, a beautiful affirmation of the life she had chosen. She felt a wave of love for her father, who had always admired the quiet strength of her marriage. Preston, on the other hand, was momentarily stunned. A marital union? He was divorced, unmarried. He felt a surge of hot anger. This was his father's final, pathetic attempt to control his life, to punish him for his divorce, for not being the docile, predictable son he'd always wanted. The old man was trying to box him in, but then the gears in his sharp, calculating mind began to turn. The clause was a problem, but every problem had a solution, a loophole, and his solution was sitting right next to him. A slow, predatory grin spread across Preston's face. He turned to Kenzie, his eyes gleaming. He stood up, pulling a suddenly confused Kenzie to her feet beside him. Well, Dad was always a step ahead, wasn't he? Preston announced, his voice booming with false joviality. He wanted his children to be in stable unions. A man of tradition. I respect that. He looked around the room, his gaze landing on Catherine, then Mr. Shaw. He was putting on a show, and he was the star. It seems my father's timing was, as always, impeccable. He must have known. Garrett, Catherine, I have an announcement to make. Kenzie and I were waiting for the right moment, after a respectable period of mourning, of course. But this seems fated. He took Kenzie's left hand in his grip firm. Kenzie Monroe, the love of my life, has done me the honor of agreeing to be my wife. We are engaged to be married. He beamed, a perfect picture of a happy, devoted fiancé. Kenzie, caught off guard but quickly adapting, produced a dazzling smile. She held up her hand where a massive canary diamond, a recent gift from Preston, glittered under the boardroom lights. Catherine stared at her brother, aghast. The audacity was breathtaking. The insincerity was a physical offense. She knew Preston didn't love this woman. He loved the way she looked on his arm, the way she deferred to him, the way she reflected his own success back at him. This was a lie, a performance designed to secure a fortune. Engaged? Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. Preston, you can't be serious. Never more serious in my life, sis, he shot back, his grin tightening. He turned his attention back to the lawyer. So there you have it, Garrett. I am, for all intents and purposes, fulfilling the spirit of my father's clause. My half of the inheritance is secure. He sounded so sure of himself, so utterly convinced that his cleverness had once again won the day. Mr. Shaw listened to the grand pronouncement without a single change in his placid expression. He did not seem surprised or impressed, or even convinced. He simply waited for Preston to finish his speech. When the silence returned, Mr. Shaw slowly folded his hands on top of the will. His gaze was calm, but there was a new, steely intensity to it. An engagement, Preston, is a promise of a future event, the lawyer said, his voice quiet yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority. Your father's will is concerned with the present. The clause is explicit. It requires a beneficiary to be in a stable, legally recognized marital union at the time of this will's execution. He let the words sink in. The spirit of the clause is not sufficient. The letter of the law is what binds us here, and the letter requires a marriage certificate, not an engagement ring. The trap had been sprung, and Preston Davenport, for the first time that day, realized he had walked right into it. The smug confidence on Preston's face evaporated, replaced by a flash of raw fury. He saw his $450 million, his new Ferrari, his absolute power, all begin to shimmer and fade like a mirage. The old man had outplayed him. That's preposterous, Preston boomed, his voice echoing in the suddenly tense room. It's an archaic, controlling stipulation. It can be challenged in court. I'm his son, for God's sake. You are free to challenge it, of course, Mr. Shaw replied, his tone perfectly even. But Walter's legal team and myself spent months constructing this will. It is ironclad. The morality clause, as it is often called, has been upheld in this state on numerous occasions when it is proven to be a core tenet of the deceased's firmly held beliefs. And Walter's belief in the sanctity of marriage was, as you know, unshakable. Kenzie, seeing the fortune slipping away, jumped in. But we are getting married. Next week, if we have to. We can go to City Hall this afternoon. She looked at Preston, her eyes wide with a mixture of panic and determination. Right, darling? Preston seized on the idea. It was a bluff, a desperate gambit, but it was all he had. Exactly, he said, forcing a confident smile back onto his face. This is a minor logistical issue, a matter of timing. We had a date set for the spring, a large affair. But for this, we'll expedite. As my fiancé, Kenzie is my partner. The will should recognize that. The will recognizes only legal documents, Preston, Mr. Shaw countered, his patience seemingly infinite. He was like a granite wall, unmovable and impassive. A marriage certificate, to be precise. Do you have one? We'll get one, Preston insisted, his voice rising. The will is executed based on the circumstances as they exist today, October 14th, 2025, Mr. Shaw said, tapping a manicured finger on the document. Not as they might exist tomorrow or next week. A heavy, suffocating silence descended. Catherine watched the exchange, her initial shock turning into a kind of grim satisfaction. Her father had known his son so well. He had anticipated Preston's every move, his every lie, his every attempt to bend the rules to his will. This wasn't just about marriage. It was a final, posthumous test of character, and Preston was failing spectacularly. Preston began to pace behind his chair, a caged predator. His mind was racing, cycling through a Rolodex of his high-powered attorneys, searching for an angle, a weakness. This is ridiculous, he snarled, pointing a finger at Mr. Shaw. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The old man's loyal dog, getting one last bite. I am merely executing my client's final wishes, Mr. Shaw replied, completely unfazed by the insult. My personal feelings are irrelevant. He paused, his gaze deliberate and heavy. The situation is quite simple, Preston. Catherine being legally married meets the conditions of the legacy clause. You being unmarried do not. So what does that mean? Kenzie asked, her voice trembling slightly. The diamonds on her neck suddenly seemed less brilliant. What happens to his share? Mr. Shaw looked at her, then back to Preston. According to the contingency provisions in the will, if a primary beneficiary fails to meet the conditions of the legacy clause, their share of the estate is to be dissolved and redistributed. Preston stopped pacing. Redistributed? To whom? To Catherine. The idea of his sister getting the entire fortune was infuriating, but it was better than the alternative. No, said Mr. Shaw, not to Catherine. He took a slow, deliberate breath, like a judge about to deliver a final, unappealable verdict. The atmosphere in the room grew cold, charged with a sense of impending doom. Preston, the lawyer said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tenor. There is another reason this discussion about your potential marriage to Ms. Monroe is entirely moot. There is a far more significant and legally binding impediment. Preston stared at him, confused. What are you talking about? What impediment? Mr. Shaw leaned forward slightly, his calm demeanor finally cracking to reveal a sliver of the righteous fire beneath. His eyes, which had been passive and observant, were now sharp and piercing. The impediment, he said slowly and clearly, is that you cannot legally marry Ms. Monroe, or anyone else for that matter, because Preston, you are already married. The words hung in the air, electric and impossible. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The frantic ticking of an ornate grandfather clock in the corner of the room sounded like a drumbeat counting down to an execution. Kenzie was the first to react. A short, sharp laugh escaped her lips, a sound of pure disbelief. What? That's insane. Married? Don't be ridiculous. He's been divorced for 5 years. She looked at Preston for confirmation, her smile faltering as she saw the color drain from his face. Preston stood frozen, his skin turning a sickly, ashen gray. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His mind, usually so quick and agile, was a maelstrom of denial and panic. It couldn't be. It was impossible. No one knew. No one. Married? Catherine echoed, her voice filled with confusion. To whom? We all went through the divorce with Charlotte. It was finalized years ago. Mr. Shaw reached into his leather portfolio. His movements were precise, unhurried. He pulled out a slim manila folder. From it, he produced a single official document, its crisp letterhead and embossed seal catching the light. I am not referring to his marriage to Charlotte Spencer, Mr. Shaw stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He slid the document across the polished mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Preston. I am referring to your legal, current, and undissolved marriage to a Ms. Leora Donovan. The name struck Preston like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his hand gripping the back of his chair for support. It was a name he had buried, a secret he had locked away in the deepest, darkest vault of his life. Kenzie snatched the paper from the table. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she read it. It was a certified copy of a marriage certificate. The names were clear: Preston Alistair Davenport and Leora Sophia Donovan. The location: a small, obscure county clerk's office in Delaware. The date was 8 years ago, 2 years before his public, messy divorce from his first wife, Charlotte. What is this? Kenzie whispered, her voice cracking. Her face was a mask of horror and betrayal. She held the paper out to Preston, her hands shaking violently. Preston, what the hell is this? Who is Leora Donovan? Preston couldn't answer. He was trapped. The secret he had so carefully guarded, the lie that formed the very foundation of his curated public life, had just been detonated in the center of this room. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in on him. This is a forgery, he finally choked out, the words sounding weak and desperate even to his own ears. This is a lie. My father, he must have had this fake to ruin me. I assure you it is no forgery, Mr. Shaw said calmly. He gestured to the seal on the document. It is a legally certified copy, requested by our firm last month. Your marriage to Ms. Donovan is a matter of public record, however deeply you chose to bury it. It is valid, and it has never been legally dissolved. Catherine stared at her brother, a new kind of understanding dawning in her eyes. The secret trips, the unexplained financial withdrawals, the impenetrable wall he had built around certain aspects of his past. It all started to click into place with sickening clarity. Preston, you were married to someone else while you were still married to Charlotte? You committed bigamy? No, Mr. Shaw clarified. The timeline is more insidious than that. The marriage to Ms. Donovan on this certificate is dated 8 years ago. His divorce from Charlotte was finalized 5 years ago. This means for 3 years, he was legally married to 2 women at once. However, our investigation suggests the marriage to Charlotte had irretrievably broken down long before, and this secret union was the true cause. Kenzie crumpled into her chair, the marriage certificate fluttering from her hand onto the floor. The diamonds around her neck felt like a collar. She wasn't his fiancée. She was his mistress. Worse, she was the fool he was parading around while he had a wife hidden away somewhere. The public humiliation washed over her in a suffocating wave. All her smugness, her triumphant glances at Catherine, had been a pathetic joke. She had been the punchline all along. "Who?" Kenzie demanded, her voice rising to a shrill cry. "Who is she, Preston? Tell me." Preston's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that didn't exist. He looked at his sister's disgusted face, at Kenzie's betrayed tears, and at the unwavering judgmental gaze of Garrett Shaw. The walls were closing in. The game was over. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he stammered, but the fight had gone out of him. He was exposed, his carefully crafted persona stripped away to reveal the fraud underneath. "Oh, I think I do," Mr. Shaw countered, his voice cold as ice. "Because your father, Preston, was a far more observant man than you ever gave him credit for. He had his suspicions for years, and 6 months before he passed, he hired a private investigator to find the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, is far darker than a simple, secret marriage." Mr. Shaw reached back into his portfolio. This time he pulled out a much thicker file, bound with a rubber band. "Your father wanted to understand," he said, placing the file on the table with a soft thud. "Now, so will we all." The thick file landed on the mahogany table with a soft, definitive thud that seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen from the room. It was not a legal document like the will. It was something else entirely. It was thick, slightly worn, and bound with a simple rubber band, giving it the mundane appearance of a case file, which only made it seem more sinister. The tab, marked in neat block letters, read, "Davenport, P. Personal Inquiry." Preston stared at it as if it were a venomous snake, coiled and ready to strike. The blood that had drained from his face now seemed to turn to ice in his veins. This was not a legal maneuver. This was an excavation, a digging up of buried things he thought were sealed in tombs of secrecy and reinforced with concrete walls of money. Mr. Shaw's movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as he removed the rubber band and opened the file. The room was so quiet that the rustle of the first page turning sounded like a crack of thunder. "As I was saying," the lawyer began, his voice a low, dispassionate baritone that transformed him from an executor into the narrator of a dark and sordid tale. "Your father, Walter, was a far more observant man than you ever gave him credit for. He noticed things, inconsistencies, things a son believes a father is too old or too distracted to see." He looked up from the page, his gaze settling on Preston. There were the finances to start. Large regular cash withdrawals that couldn't be accounted for. Wire transfers to an opaque holding company registered in Delaware, a company with no stated purpose, no employees, no public footprint. Then there were your absences. Sudden business trips to Salt Lake City when Davenport Innovations has no interests, no partners, no clients in Utah. He worried Preston. At first he feared you were being blackmailed or had fallen into a gambling debt. He feared for you. Mr. Shaw paused, letting the ghost of a father's concern hang in the air before delivering the devastating truth. The reality, he discovered, was in some ways much crueler. 6 months before he passed, after a year of growing unease, Walter did what he always did when faced with a problem he couldn't solve. He sought the truth. He hired a man, a discreet and highly effective private investigator named David Chen. Mr. Chen's job was to provide answers, and he did. He slid the top page of the report across the table. It was a photograph, a high-resolution shot taken from a distance. It showed Preston, dressed casually, getting out of a rental car in front of a sleek, modern house, set against a backdrop of stark, beautiful desert mountains. He was carrying a bag of groceries. Mr. Chen began by tracing the holding company, which led him to this property in a remote corner of Utah. And that is where he discovered the reason for all the secrecy. He discovered Leora Donovan. Mr. Shaw then began to read from the typed summary of the report, his voice steady and clear, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of Preston's life. "Leora Sophia Donovan," he began, "is a computer scientist. Not just a computer scientist, but a generational talent, a prodigy in software architecture and advanced algorithmic design. Born in Kiev, Ukraine, educated at the top of her class. You met her 10 years ago at a tech conference in Berlin. At the time, she was a rising star, presenting a paper on a revolutionary data compression algorithm that was years, perhaps decades, ahead of anything else on the market. He looked directly at Preston, whose face was now a waxy, expressionless mask. You saw her genius, and you saw an opportunity. You didn't offer her a job, did you, Preston? That would have meant contracts, board oversight, intellectual property filings. You poached her. You approached her privately, promised her the world. A private lab, unlimited resources, a partnership. You convinced this brilliant young woman to abandon her career path, leave her home, and come to the United States on a work visa. A visa sponsored not by Davenport Innovations, but by your secret Delaware holding company. You told her work was too valuable, too revolutionary to be exposed to corporate rivals. You told her she needed to be protected. The story began to unfold, each detail more damning than the last. Leora, young and idealistic, had trusted him completely. She became the ghost in his machine, the secret architect behind the technology that had transformed Davenport Innovations from a successful hardware company into a billion-dollar tech behemoth. Catherine's eyes widened, a sickening realization dawning. She remembered years ago when Preston, then head of R&D, had suddenly unveiled the framework for the Synapse project. It had come out of nowhere, fully formed, its core logic so advanced that no one on the internal team could fully replicate it. He had claimed it was the result of years of his own private, intensive research. It was the single biggest success of his career, the one that cemented his status as his father's successor. And it had all been a lie. She was your secret weapon, Mr. Shaw continued, his voice laced with a quiet, righteous contempt. The Synapse data routing system, the flagship product that generates 60% of the company's annual revenue, was built entirely on the back of her algorithm. And you knew how valuable she was, too valuable to risk losing. So you devised a way to lock her down, to bind her to you in a way no employment contract ever could. You married her 8 years ago in that obscure clerk's office, telling her it was the only way to truly form a partnership, to protect her from the corporate world. You spun a tale of your ruthless father, your greedy wife Charlotte, a cutthroat board of directors. You painted yourself as her noble protector. Kenzie let out a small, choked gasp. This wasn't just a secret wife. This was the woman whose intellect was the source of all the wealth, the woman who had likely paid for the very diamonds on her neck. She wasn't just a mistress. She was a parasite feeding off a genius Preston kept in the dark. Mr. Shaw went on, detailing the meticulously constructed prison Preston had built for Leora. The house in Utah wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage. Mr. Chen's report is thorough, he said, flipping a page that contains satellite images and floor plans. He details her isolation. She has no social circle. Her contact with the outside world is almost entirely digital and routed through a server you control. The household staff are paid through the holding company and have signed ironclad, multi-million-dollar non-disclosure agreements. You controlled her finances, her immigration status, which was perpetually in process, and her access to information. You told her that your public life, your high-profile divorce from Charlotte, your string of vapid girlfriends, it was all a necessary charade. A performance to keep the press and your rivals from digging into your real life and discovering your most valuable secret, her. And for 8 years, she believed you. The investigator's file was chilling in its detail. He had documented Preston's visits once every 4 to 6 weeks, arriving late on a Friday and leaving before dawn on a Monday. But the final piece of the puzzle, the piece that had shattered Walter Davenport, was not a photograph or a financial statement. Mr. Chen placed the house under long-range surveillance, Mr. Shaw said, his voice grim. And 3 months ago, he captured a conversation you had with Leora in the garden. Your father listened to this recording. He had me listen to it. I believe, the lawyer said, his professional composure cracking for just a moment to reveal a flash of human sorrow. It was the thing that broke his heart. He slid a small digital audio recorder across the polished table. He wanted you to hear it too. Mr. Shaw pressed play. The audio was startlingly clear, the sound of crickets chirping in the background. Then a woman's voice, soft and melodic, with a distinct Eastern European accent tinged with a deep, aching weariness. Leora, audio. Preston, it has been 8 years. You said when the company was safe, when you were CEO, we could finally be together. You are CEO now. I am tired of hiding. I want to meet your sister. I want to go to a museum. I want a life. A pause, then Preston's voice, a tone he had never used in this room. It was intimate, placating, dripping with the smooth poison of practiced manipulation. Preston, audio. My love, my Leora, you know how complicated things are. The board is still unstable. My father is watching my every move. Just a little longer. We are so close. Your work is too important. Don't you see? Everything I do out there, it's for us, to protect us. Leora, audio. But you were photographed with that model, Kenzie. The papers say you are serious. Kenzie flinched as if she had been struck. Her name, spoken by this ghost of a woman 1,000 miles away, was a profound violation. Preston, audio. Kenzie, she's a distraction, a beautiful, empty-headed fool I use to keep the press from digging into my real life. My real life is here, with you. You know that. She means nothing. You are everything. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. Kenzie stared at the silent recorder, her face a canvas of pure, unadulterated fury and humiliation. Empty-headed fool. She means nothing. The lie wasn't just that he was married. The lie was everything. Her entire relationship, the future she had so smugly envisioned, was nothing more than a strategic tool used to manage his real wife. She had been a human shield, and she hadn't even known it. Mr. Shaw carefully placed the recorder back into the file and closed the cover. The investigation was over. The verdict was in. Walter heard that, he said, his voice now cold as a winter grave. And he finally understood the full scope of your deception. It was never about protecting Leora. It was about controlling his most valuable asset. He created this will in the weeks that followed. He knew you would bring Ms. Monroe here today. He knew you would lie about your engagement. He knew you would try to cheat your way into a fortune you didn't deserve. This entire meeting was a stage, Preston, one designed by your father for one singular, heartbreaking purpose: to finally show everyone, including you, exactly who you are. The click of the audio recorder shutting off was deafening. It left a vacuum in the boardroom, a void that was immediately filled by the wreckage of Preston's life. The air, once thick with entitlement, was now choked with the toxic dust of exposed lies. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner no longer sounded like a measure of wealth, but like a countdown to oblivion. Kenzie was the first to move, but it was not the fluid, confident motion of the woman who had walked in. She rose from her chair with a stiff, jerky motion, as if her body was being forced to reanimate after a fatal shock. Her face, a canvas that had been painted with smug satisfaction just minutes before, was now a twisted mask of raw humiliation. The words from the recording, "a beautiful, empty-headed fool," echoed in the space, replaying in her eyes for everyone to see. She stared at Preston, but she wasn't seeing the powerful tech mogul, her ticket to a life of unimaginable luxury. She was seeing a stranger, a puppeteer, who had not only pulled her strings, but had mocked her for dancing. A choked, guttural sound escaped her throat, a cross between a laugh and a sob. "An empty-headed fool," she whispered, the words tasting like acid. "Is that what I am, Preston? Was I a fool for believing your lies? Or was I just a convenient piece of scenery for your pathetic double life?" He couldn't meet her gaze. His eyes darted toward the window, the floor, anywhere but at the inferno of fury he had ignited. "Kenzie, listen!" he started, his voice a weak rasp. "No!" she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "You don't get to speak. I have listened enough. I listened to your promises. I listened to your plans for our future. All the while you were visiting your real wife, the brilliant woman you caged like an animal, the woman whose genius paid for this suit on your back, and this rock you put on my finger as a prop." Her movements became sharp, precise. With a look of sublime contempt, she pulled the massive canary diamond ring from her finger. It was a spectacular jewel, a beacon of wealth that had been her ultimate trophy. Now, it was a shackle. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, the light catching its facets, a miniature sun of pure deception. "You are a monster," she hissed, her voice low and trembling, with a rage that was terrifying in its intensity. "You didn't just cheat on me. You made my entire existence a lie. You made me the other woman to a woman you were simultaneously holding prisoner. There aren't words for what you are." For a moment it looked as though she might hurl the ring at his head. Instead, she did something far more devastating. She turned to the polished table, to the half-full glass of imported water that sat beside her, and with a gesture of final, utter dismissal, she dropped the ring into it. There was no dramatic splash, only a quiet, final plink. The magnificent diamond sank to the bottom, its fire and brilliance immediately distorted by the water, becoming a dull, pathetic glimmer, a perfect metaphor for their relationship. "Consider our engagement, our entire pathetic relationship over," she spat. Her eyes, now cold and hard as stone, flickered to Mr. Shaw. "Will this, all of this, become public?" The question was not one of curiosity, but of survival. The terror of a socialite facing a scandal of this magnitude was palpable in her voice. "A will of this nature, once executed, becomes a matter of public record," Mr. Shaw replied, his tone neutral but the implications clear. "The details will inevitably emerge." That was all Kenzie needed to hear. The blood drained from her face, replaced by a steely resolve. She would have to get ahead of this. Call her publicist. Craft a narrative. Become the victim, not the fool. Without another word, she snatched her Chanel purse from the table and stormed toward the door, her heels clicking in angry, defiant staccato on the marble floor. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing like a final, unappealable judgment. The silence that descended now was different. It was intimate, familial, and somehow far more damning. Preston, stripped of his mistress and his bravado, looked utterly adrift. He finally turned his gaze to the one person left in the room who shared his blood, his eyes wide with a desperation she had never seen before. "Catherine," he pleaded, his voice hoarse, the name a fragile thread cast across an impassable chasm. "Don't!" Catherine's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air with the sharpness of surgical steel. She stood up, not with the explosive anger of Kenzie, but with a sorrow so profound it seemed to age her before his very eyes. She walked slowly around the table until she was standing over him, forcing him to look up at her. "Don't you dare say my name," she said, her voice trembling with a grief that had curdled into rage. "For my entire life, I have been your defender. When you were cruel to your friends in school, I told myself it was just ambition. When you bulldozed your way through your first marriage, I told Dad he was being too hard on you, that he didn't understand your passion. After the divorce with Charlotte, I told everyone you just needed time to heal. I made excuses for your arrogance, your affairs, your boundless selfishness. I thought it was just your character." Tears began to stream down her face, but they were not tears of pity. They were hot, angry tears of betrayal. "But this isn't a character flaw, Preston. This is a sickness of the soul. You didn't just hide a wife. You built a prison for a human being. You exploited her, isolated her, and stole not just her work, but her life. And you did it all with a smile on your face while you paraded women like Kenzie around to throw everyone off the scent." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a fierce, anguished whisper. "I know now why Dad looked so tired these last few months, why he seemed so distant. It wasn't just his heart condition, it was this. It was you. The knowledge of what his own son was capable of, it crushed him. He didn't die of a heart attack, Preston. He died of a broken heart. You killed him with your lies just as surely as if you had used a weapon. The accusation hung between them, brutal and undeniable. You are not my brother, she declared, the words like stones. The brother I knew, the little boy I grew up with, he's gone. Or maybe he was never there at all. I don't know who you are, but you are a stranger to me." She straightened up, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. She turned to her husband. "Robert, we're leaving." Robert, who had remained a pillar of silent shock support, placed a gentle hand on her back and guided her toward the door. Before leaving, Catherine paused, her hand on the doorknob, and looked back at Mr. Shaw. "Thank you, Garrett," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for honoring my father's wishes and for bringing the truth to light. He would be grateful." The door closed gently behind them, leaving only Preston and the lawyer in the vast, silent room. The panoramic view of the city, once a symbol of his domain, now seemed to be a silent jury, witnessing his complete and utter downfall. "So that's it then?" Preston finally asked, his voice a hollow, defeated whisper. He looked like a man who had been flayed alive. "I get nothing?" "That is not entirely accurate," Mr. Shaw said, his tone still perfectly measured. He retrieved the thick will from the table and turned to the final, meticulously crafted pages. "Your father, even after learning the depths of your depravity, did not believe in utter destruction. He believed in consequences. He did not strip you of everything. Per the terms of his employment contract, you retain your position as CEO of Davenport Innovations." A tiny, desperate flicker of hope ignited in Preston's eyes. The company. He still had the company. He could rebuild. He could survive. "However," Mr. Shaw continued, extinguishing that flicker as quickly as it had appeared, "I suspect that will be a very difficult position to hold. Your father also stipulated that a copy of this investigation and the terms of this will be delivered to every member of the board of directors this afternoon. Your professional future is now in their hands." Preston flinched, the hope dying completely. "But as for the inheritance," the lawyer went on, his voice taking on a new final authority, "your violation of the legacy clause has, as you now understand, triggered the contingency your father so carefully planned. Your entire $450 million share of the estate is hereby void." He paused, allowing the monumental weight of that loss to crush what was left of Preston's spirit. "That entire sum," Mr. Shaw announced, a note of profound, righteous satisfaction finally entering his voice, "is to be immediately and irrevocably transferred into a newly created trust, a trust your father named the Donovan Freedom and Innovation Trust." Preston's head snapped up, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. "He gave it to her." "He did," Mr. Shaw confirmed, looking Preston directly in the eye. "Walter's final note on the matter was quite clear. He wrote, 'This money was generated by a genius my son kept in chains. Therefore, it is not his to inherit. It is a debt to be repaid. It is restitution for a crime against a human soul.' The trust will be administered by this firm. It provides Ms. Leora Donovan with complete and unlimited financial independence for the rest of her life. It provides for the best immigration lawyers in the country to secure her citizenship and untangle her from the web of corporate entities you used to control her. And it provides for a permanent, professional security detail to ensure you can never, ever control or coerce her again." Mr. Shaw leaned forward, delivering the final devastating blow. "Your father wanted to ensure Leora's liberation was immediate, which is why, Preston, as we have been sitting in this room, watching your world fall apart, a very different scene has been playing out in Utah. A senior partner from my firm, along with a trauma counselor and a financial advisor, flew there this morning. Right now, they are sitting with Leora. They have given her your father's personal letter of apology. They are showing her the evidence of your deception. They are telling her the truth, and they are telling her that she is free. While you have lost a fortune, she has just inherited one, along with the one thing you stole from her that is priceless: her future." The finality of it all was absolute. Preston Davenport wasn't just disinherited, he was erased. His father's legacy, his wealth, his power, it had all been meticulously redirected to the very person he had wronged so grievously. Walter Davenport's final act was not one of simple punishment. It was a masterpiece of restorative justice. He had empowered his son's victim on a scale Preston could never have imagined. Preston sat alone in the silent, opulent boardroom, a billionaire on paper, but a bankrupt man in every way that mattered. He was haunted now by the name of the woman he had tried to keep a secret, a name that, thanks to his father's final, brilliant act of checkmate, would now be etched into the Davenport legacy forever, eclipsing his own in a blaze of righteous triumph. In the end, Preston Davenport's empire of deceit came crashing down, not from a hostile takeover or a market crash, but from the quiet, posthumous wisdom of a father who valued integrity over inheritance. While Preston was left to face the public scandal and the shambles of his personal and professional life, a brilliant woman named Leora Donovan, once a ghost in the machine, was finally given the keys to her own future. She was not only financially secure beyond her wildest dreams, but she was free to claim her work, her identity, and her life. It's a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of finding the light. And sometimes the most satisfying justice is not about revenge, but about restoration. What do you think? Was this the ultimate karma, or should Preston have faced even harsher consequences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of secrets, lies, and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story of payback, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you breathless. Your support helps us continue to bring these incredible tales to light.